All right, here we go. Hi, y'all. I am very excited today to be here with my dear friend Swim, who I met at Warren Wilson College. His actually real name is Nadir Karim. Did I say that
Excellent.
right? Yeah. And he and I go way back, and he is currently in Albuquerque, New Mexico, where he is working for a large nonprofit. And I will ask him quite a few questions, but beforehand, Swim, I'll just ask you to tell me a little bit about your background and what brought you to New Mexico.
Hey, no doubt, Alex. One, so good to see you. I mean, it's been so long since we graduated college, and now we're doing our own thing. From North Carolina to New Mexico, from North Carolina to Australia. You know, we've been doing great things. So I'm just glad to be here. And it's super funny is how I got here was really pretty funny. So after graduating college back in 2010, ended up moving to Seattle with my then girlfriend. Lived there for some time, and then after living in Seattle, ended up moving all around the world. Got my passport, got that stamped a couple times, was in Iceland and New Zealand, Mexico, Guatemala, spent a good amount of time in France, came back to the States, and then my then girlfriend became my wife. So then we moved back to the States and ended up kind of bouncing around. We were like in our early to mid 20s. We had no money, of course, after traveling the world. And then we ended up in Albuquerque, actually, just by chance. We looked at the map and we were like, you know what, where haven't we lived? She was from Kansas, I was from Philadelphia. So we had, of course, lived in the Southeast, we lived in the Northwest, we lived in the Midwest, and we were like, the Southwest is the one place we haven't gone. So that's how I ended up here in Albuquerque. It'll be actually 6 years this August. So in 2 months.
Wow. Wow. I have not been to Albuquerque, but I hear so many cool things about it. And I was actually in Arizona and Utah over Christmas. I didn't tell you this when we were talking earlier, but it's such a fascinating part of not just the US, but the whole world. So yeah, I can see why you stayed. I mean, I know that Albuquerque is probably a little bit different, but and you've been at the how long have you been at this nonprofit?
Also, 6 years.
Okay, right.
It's been a wild ride. I've been working in the nonprofit space for just so long. And it's funny because I work with a bigger nonprofit, and it's interesting when you go from working with like these little small nonprofits and you're begging for money, and then you get to some of these bigger organizations and they got a little bit more resources, access to more capital, just the ability to exchange and connect with more people across the nation. That's been a really, really good thing. I'm trying to do it big. Kind of like you're doing it big, you started off with the Warren Wilson newspaper, and then like you're scaling up, like you're getting a name for yourself. I'm just trying to keep up with you.
Oh. This is your interview, Swim, not mine.
Listen, I'm gonna be asking you some questions at this rate, but I'm gonna let you start off.
Oh boy, all right, okay. Well, so I've been just this morning reading a little bit about the certain things happening, the pandemic and protests in New Mexico. Tell me about how your life has changed since the pandemic hit. When did you start hearing about COVID-19? Did you think that it would come to the United States? Yeah, tell me about that.
Yeah, and those are real good questions. And I think, I was thinking about this earlier, Alec, and I think there are about 4 or 5 moments in my life that I think I'm going to forever remember, at least so far in my 32 years going around the sun. One of the big ones is the birth of my son. Like, I just remember that moment so well. The day I got married, 9/11 actually, like that's one of those moments, like you just remember where you were. Yeah. And then COVID. Yeah. COVID is one of these experiences that for so many of us, because it's a global ordeal, we can all remember we're all gonna remember at least one part of COVID 10 years from now, 20 years from now. 30, 40 years from now, it's going to be like your grandkids are going to ask you, what was it like in 2020 during COVID? And you can say, I remember this, or I remember that. And I think COVID is one of those big things. And I remember really first hearing about it, I think in the beginning of February 2020. And that's where it really started to, because I was hearing about something going on in China, but I didn't pay attention to it really until about mid-March. And it started to really see some upticks in Seattle and New York. And I remember a real defining moment for me is when the state of Ohio decided that they were going to cancel school for the remainder of the year. And it was just like what? Like that big, you know, like that's really big to like say you're not sending kids to school for an entire state. And Ohio is a big state.
Yeah.
So for me, that was the moment where I really, really started to pay attention to what was going on with COVID. And of course, it's just been a really wild roller coaster ever since then.
Right, right. Has your work been affected? You said you have a lot of Microsoft Team calls. So are you working from home? Have you been personally affected? Do you know anyone who's actually had it? I know that New Mexico, comparatively speaking to a lot of other states, has done a lot better, but also now, as I saw, and we were talking, you've got Texas on one side of you and you've got Arizona on the other, and both of those states have rising cases. So yeah, how has Albuquerque fared?
Yeah, you know, I think it's all relative,
Yeah.
right? In areas where you know there's going to be a larger amount of population, the Dallases, San Francisco's, the Detroits, you're seeing more and more people, of course, that are contracting or being in the path of COVID. And it's like a wild wave, you know? For me, I haven't known anyone that's contracted COVID, and I don't know anyone that's passed away from COVID, thankfully. But of course, I know a person that knows a person that has, or I know a person that knows someone that's passed away or contracted COVID. For me, it's been very interesting because, you know, I was really just thinking about how there's so many people I know, of course, in places like New Jersey, the places like parts of Florida, and they're like, yeah, like I know someone that's not only died from COVID, I have a family member that's died from COVID.
Yeah.
There's a lot of economic aspects to it. One of the things I think a lot of people are seeing with COVID is that access to healthcare is so important. There are many individuals that maybe they have underlying conditions, or maybe they don't even have underlying conditions, but they're in populations where the spread of COVID is a little bit more rampant. So I've been very fortunate and really checking my privilege in that respect. Because I have a space where, you know, I don't have, you know, it's not like New York where I have a person to the left and the right of me with like, you know, paper thin walls. So there's been a lot of privilege check, at least for me, and fully acknowledging that there are a lot of people out there that are in positions, just from a financial aspect, they're just more likely to get COVID. I mean, we're talking about essential workers as an example.
Yeah, for sure. Did everything in Albuquerque shut down? Did the like restaurants close and stuff like that? Was there orders? What? Tell me where that is.
Yeah, oh man, and look, this is gonna sound like a real selfish thing for me to say, but my birthday is March 7th, right?
Oh, no.
So for me, like I had my birthday March 7th, and I ended up going to this hot tub, well not hot tub, this like hot springs in Santa Fe, New Mexico, which is about north. I go to this hot springs, and I was like, this is great, it's a good birthday. And like a week later, and I remember the date, March 13th, won't forget it was a Friday, the governor got on our televisions and said that we're shutting everything down. And I was like thinking, like, one, selfishly, I was like thinking this is kind of crazy, but I'm glad I had a chance to explore my birthday. There's a lot of people right now, Alex, that they don't have birthdays, proms, graduations. So I feel really bad for a lot of these young kids that don't experience that. But yeah, everything shut down for sure. We're in a state where you saw at least our governor shut down restaurants, buildings. It was like with a lot of other places. If it wasn't essential grocery stores, gas stations, it was pretty much closed. So my son, of course, was disappointed because we can't go to Chuck E. Cheese anymore, and he wants to go see that mouse. And that's just like a cesspool because, you know, they're touching everything, they're licking everything, and Chuck E. Cheese is disgusting.
Yeah.
But yeah, they shut down for sure.
And I was just reading, so the governor, Michelle Grisham, is saying that they might pause. They had reopening plans for the next phase of reopening July 1st, but those have now been paused because it looks like cases are, I guess, possibly rising. So, and the state fair I read as well might not happen, which is a drag because the state fair is so fun. So,
but you say fun, I say expensive and crowded. But we listen, we disagree. It's how you all do it in Australia.
No, we don't really have. Oh, I think there are fairs, but it's not the same as like I don't know. There's this kind of maybe I've kind of romanticized it in my mind. It's like, but also if the state fair is the only thing, is like compared to people not being able to have funerals and weddings, like come on. So
No, yeah, you're seeing that right now. I think it was announced about 2 days ago. Like Texas is probably one of the bigger states that's saying like, all those things we were opening, we are closing.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's no surprise, and it's not, it's not anything. I don't want to say it's not anything bad. People have been cooped up in their houses, and if you're of that generation where you're not used to that type of solitary, people are like itching to get outside. Now, for me, I'm not in any type of rush at all to go outside, but I can totally get it if you're like you're an investor, if you're like single and like live by yourself. Like it's enough to drive you crazy. It's enough to drive you crazy. So I don't blame people that are going out and trying to, just enjoy life and appreciate being around people. But yeah, I think you're gonna see some more scaling backs that are gonna happen, and this definitely happened in New Mexico.
Yeah. When I started interviewing people about the pandemic in mid-March, I knew things were going to change, but I did not predict how the senseless death of George Floyd would completely just rock the nation and the world. I've just been reading a little bit about protests in Albuquerque. Was wondering, did you go, and what were your thoughts around the Black Lives Matter movement specifically?
Yeah, really, really good question. And what a shift, right? In the middle of a global pandemic, at least here in the United States, and I know that there's protests that are happening in other countries around the world. I'll speak from my experiences being in the United States. Now, what a crazy shift. You're seeing people that have been in their homes for weeks, months at a time, and then all of a sudden this really tragic event that could have easily been prevented has occurred. So yes, to answer your question directly, I have participated in a couple of the protests that have been going on. They're actually kind of odd they were odd to be a part of, honestly, because it was like, again, we were all in our houses, and then all of a sudden you look outside and there's thousands of people. So there are many moments of conflict because you're like, I don't know if I really want to be around all these people, but at the same time, I need to be around all these people. And for me, I have a son, and he's 4 years old. And I think about how, as a father, those experiences of, one, he could grow up and be in that same type of person. And you don't want to have your children be on the T-shirt and loving up. And conversely, I could also walk out of this house as a Black man in America, and he could grow up in a world where he doesn't have a father because of the interaction happen with police. And this is something that George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, that they are not the first individuals to have this happen to them. And there's just so many instances in America of racial inequality and basically not having the justice that is due as an African American man or woman in America. So you're gonna see a lot of people that are gonna continue to speak out on stuff like this, because you're talking about, I remember I Can't Breathe with Eric Gardner. Now, I remember the Trayvon Martin case. I remember all these types of experiences of Black men and Black women, unfortunately, losing their lives to a system that should ideally be designed to protect them in moments of chaos.
I mentioned Crush, who I interviewed earlier. I was asking him about like the timing, and because it is, we are in the midst of a pandemic. And he was saying this was, but it was a window, it was an opportunity. You don't often get given a platform. And if this is a moment where we are seeing change already, we're seeing defunding the police, which is saying that it actually symbolizes a lot more than just defunding the police. It's about redistributing resources and stuff like that. So you felt that despite being in the midst of a pandemic, it was necessary, I guess.
Yeah, there are many moments of individuals and groups that have been at the forefront of injustice in all kinds of ways. You think about what happened, gosh, not that long ago, with like the Me Too movement, right? A lot of individuals, a lot of women that are speaking out and saying, like, this is something that isn't new. Harvey Weinstein wasn't the first, right? But there are certain moments where you see this paradigm shift that happens in the world. And unfortunately, you hate it when cases like Harvey Weinstein is that shift, right? You like to have it get to that point organically. And you hate it when things like George Floyd are those types of things. That's why I think it's very important for people to know that this at least this particular instance, and many instances like this, it's not the first go round.
No.
And there are many individuals that have stepped up to make sure that women's rights are protected to the best of their abilities, that Indigenous people's rights are protected to the best of their ability. And I live in a place in New Mexico where there's a large Indigenous Native American population. And I know that in moments like this, when they're supporting individuals that look like me, it's important for me to support individuals that look like them.
Yeah, that was kind of, and just to kind of comment on that, I think, like you said, it's not the first time we've seen just horrific examples of police brutality, but perhaps this might have been the biggest kind of spark. Like, it's such a tragedy, but as his daughter said, Daddy changed the world. And I think that maybe that is one positive aspect, is that now we're suddenly seeing reactions like we've never seen before all over the world. And so maybe it is like the Harvey Weinstein moment of racial inequality and racial injustice, I guess. Well, maybe.
And I didn't mean to cut you off, Alex. I'll let you continue.
No, go ahead, please.
Well, think about it right now, right? You're in Australia, 8 hours away. Here we are talking.
Yeah.
Right? 16 hours. Yeah, I'm thinking the other way.
Close enough. Yeah.
And here we are talking. And I think there's a lot of power to imagine if you are someone who is in the presence of Harvey Weinstein in 1994. Right? Mm-hmm. You don't have your own platform. You don't have your own TV show. You don't have your own YouTube page. You don't have your own social media. You have to rely on big conglomerates to get your type of message out, and that can easily be a roadblock. And so when I say that experience like this are not the first time, I remember growing up and hearing and knowing all kinds of stories from my mom saying that when it comes to your interactions with the police, your set of rules are going to be different. Mm-hmm. Your set of rules are going to be different. And those rules continue for me to this day when I have interactions with law enforcement. And not just law enforcement in terms of like getting pulled over. We're talking law enforcement in terms of if you go into a store, right?
Yeah.
Being followed around in the store. If you go to a public venue, what that experience like, what's your perception or the perception of people around you are like? And so there's a lot of advantages of things like social media, because with things like the phone, all of a sudden those proofs that my mom and her mom were telling her, police plant drugs on you.
Yeah.
Of those stories of, and I've heard so many. We have a whole episode on that alone, unfortunately. But Leroy or Jamal or Lachey from down the street, like they were killed by that police officer.
Yeah.
And in those types of experiences, if it's 1995, if it's early 2000s, what do you have? You don't have any type of proof, right? Sometimes your word is not enough. But Black people have been saying this for years, that police don't treat us the same, and they treat us different, at least in the United States of America. So even though I appreciate it when words are said like we're seeing this type of change and these are, good moments to have happen, for me as an African American, and I can only speak on that respect, this is something I've known my whole life.
Yeah.
This is something I've known my whole life. But fortunately, unfortunately, because of things like cell phones and videos, we're able to capture that and say, no. We weren't just saying it to be saying it. Here's the proof.
Yeah. It is a tool. It is a tool, social media and the camera itself. And I really hope that it sparks more and more investigation into statistics and stuff like that about this kind of institutional racism that we're seeing specifically in the justice system. And with so much, we see so much footage now that wasn't available before. And I guess, but based on what you're saying, that this has always been a part of your reality, do you feel optimistic about these protests? Do you think that, I mean, obviously I could never understand, but, and so I'm grateful for you talking to me today, Swim, and giving me your time and kind of sharing your experience. But do you think that this is something that is actually going to bring about big change? Just the fact that everyone is so more aware, white people particularly, are more switched on to this?
I think there's two ways to Here's what I'd like to say about that, and there's really two things that come to mind immediately that I think will answer your question. So come on a little ride with me here.
Okay.
You know, I heard a really good line not long ago that said, slavery had taught Black people how to survive, but it didn't show people how to live in a new world.
Mm-hmm.
And when you think about the ideas of 400 plus years of oppression, it doesn't change overnight with the unfortunate killing of an African-American man in Minnesota. And so the roots run deep. I like to go to parks with my son, and there's this one park we go to, and the tree is really like, it's an older tree, and the roots, you can see the roots are like, they come up out of the ground. It's like a really cool park to see these trees. Like, I've never seen anything like that. And it had me thinking about how there are moments where if the tree gets dead or anything like that, they could cut the tree down. But if you cut the tree down, even at the bare, like at the blade of the grass, you cut it, the roots are still there. And to uplift those roots is a big freaking task.
Yeah.
And so when you ask that type of question, if I think the change is going to come, just think about that image of the tree. Like you can really do all kinds of things to get rid of that particular tree if it's a dead piece of wood. But to get the roots from out under is really, really tough. So I think it's going to happen, but it's going to be really slow. But like I said earlier, slavery taught Black people how to survive. We're going to be here.
Yeah.
We ain't going nowhere. I can tell you that.
And that is so true. I think her name was Latrice Jones. I watched her video. Trevor Noah shared it, and she was just comparing it to a game of Monopoly. And the 400, it was, I can send you the link, but she was just talking about how can you expect after 400 years of oppression and also Jim Crow and the laws around crack in the 80s and stuff like that, how can you expect for now, all of a sudden, after all of this years and years, even after slavery ended, of tactics and strategies and laws, it's not yet an equal playing field. And I guess I think of that as the root system that we're talking about. Like it's going to be, it's going to be a lot. And I don't know, when I was talking to my friend Amir last night, who's in Israel, he was like, never miss out on an opportunity for a revolution. And I was like, well, I just wonder if it's like going to take that. Like, I just don't know if we can fix what has been done, you know? I don't know. What do you reckon?
Listen, and I'm no expert in the history of revolution, so I don't know what one would say like equates a revolution. I know for me, Malcolm X says that there is no revolution without a transfer of land. So when you're looking at a revolution in the purest sense of the form, he says there was nothing nonviolent about the American Revolution. The British were taxing the colonies, and they said, we're like, this is crazy. We don't want to do this because we're not being represented from the high courts back in old England, back in the old country. So they said, well, we're either going to get the representation or we're going to do our own thing. And so they did their own thing because they had a new piece of land and they wanted to create something that they saw fit their vision. And we know there's a lot of history behind that. And there's a lot of struggles, of course, as we were talking about slavery behind that. But when you're talking about something that's as deep as a revolution, it holds a big amount of transition and change. I don't know if we're quite in that particular form, but we're still waiting on our 40 acres and a mule, to be honest. And that's one of the big things when you think about the distribution of wealth and the ownership of land in America. A lot of African Americans don't really have it. So if you're trying to get to a revolution, you really got to start and take a look at a lot of the economic disadvantages that exist.
There was a great article in the New York Times about that. Actually, it was in an argument for reparations that I read just a few days ago. And the writer, I don't remember her name, but she just goes through and she's and also how much white Americans just got handed land, just so like back in the day and and that is something that we haven't talked about as much. I've heard a lot more about police brutality than distribution of land. But land is huge because land equals wealth. So
listen, everything you just said, stamp it, because you're right, 100%.
Well, I kind of, like I said, feel a little bit removed from the United States after not being there for for 10 years. So it's great to kind of, I just need to stop talking and you need to talk more.
Well, you know, listen, listen, for the people that are watching this, as much as they're interested in hearing about me, they know you as the common denominator through all of the interviews. And I know you've had a chance a little bit to talk about your experiences. You know, just give us a little quick insight. Alex, what are some of the experiences that you've been having over these last couple of weeks, couple of months? Like, how have you been feeling? Like, seriously, how have you been feeling about COVID? How's it been, like, messing with you?
I think, and I might have emailed you a little bit about this, I think that I was just wrapped up in my own world thinking about stories in Newcastle. I write for the Newcastle Herald. I work at the Newcastle Museum. I do casual work at the Newcastle Uni. I run a grant giveaway called Awesome Newcastle. For the last 4 or 5 years, I have been Newcastle, Newcastle, Newcastle. And then all of a sudden, and I knew that the US was, just because of so much was going to be revealed about our healthcare system. I have been for a long time, especially after I experienced Australia's, relatively speaking, really good healthcare system in comparison. It was just, this was probably early March. I was like, I am worried about the US. Like, I'm worried about all the world. And also there's terrible things happening all over the world. But it was funny because I think for the first time in a very long time, I just became it's funny because I just got Australian citizenship, actually.
Congratulations.
Thank you. It's an exciting thing, especially as I watch what's happening over there. But I just became very aware of how much I care about the United States and how much, you know, I lived there for the first 22 years of my life. I lived in DC, I lived in the Appalachian Mountains, I lived in the South and Kentucky and the Carson of Kentucky, and I just have so much love and passion for the country, and I believe in its potential. And so suddenly I'm talking to more Americans than ever before, and you are one of them.
Lucky me.
So it has been, it has been interesting. I'll jump back to another question for you. Just, you mentioned that there's a high Indigenous, and I didn't know this, New Mexico has the highest percentage of Hispanic and Latin Americans and the second highest percentage of Native Americans. Have they been disproportionately, and we know that the coronavirus disproportionately affects people of color. And I was wondering if you could kind of comment, has that been noticed at all in New Mexico? Has that been observed in the news, or do you know anyone has, what do you think?
Yeah, the short answer is yes. Now, I will throw in a little disclaimer. I'm not the best person. Obviously, I'm not a Native American. Health expert either, so I don't study this.
Sure.
But one of the interesting things is, at least with COVID and Indigenous populations, is it just isn't talked about enough, to be completely honest. And, you know, I had a chance earlier today, Alex, to look at a map that I really, really appreciate. And I've looked at it many, many times over after moving to Albuquerque. And on the one hand, it's a map of African Americans and the percentages of where African Americans live in the United States, right? A lot in the South, a lot in the Midwest, and like a little bit in like parts of California. But if you go to like Middle America, you know, for people that don't know Middle America, like the Montanas, the South Dakotas, the New Mexicos, the percentages are really low. And I know for me, the African-American population in New Mexico is less than, it's actually just at 3%, right?
Right.
So like in Atlanta, that's like 60+%, right? So I looked at this map earlier today in preparation of talking to you. And then I also looked at a map of Indigenous Native American populations in the United States. And it's the complete opposite, where you see in parts of Middle America and in the Southwest, a larger amount of Indigenous populations that exist in the world. And there's a whole reason for that. Again, going back to the revolution of the Americas, right? We all know about that history, and if they don't, read a book, but we all know about that. And it's super interesting for me, when you look at these two maps, these are like two groups that oftentimes in America are forgotten about. And I know for me, growing up in Philadelphia, I remember opening that textbook and then seeing about this thing called Thanksgiving, and then reading like a paragraph or two. And that was pretty much all that was in the textbook about the history of Native Americans.
I know.
right? And it really does blow your mind.
It does.
And so I think there are many instances for that individual that lives in Wisconsin, that lives in Connecticut, that lives in Florida, that they don't understand the history of these the United States and the individuals that really were a part of this land way before any of us were here, whether by choice or by force. And so, yeah, there's no doubt about it. There's a large amount of individuals in indigenous populations in Alaska, Seattle, New Mexico, Arizona. I do a lot of work in Navajo Nation. And there's no doubt that you're seeing larger amounts of populations that are being affected by COVID. And I wish more individuals knew about this. And it's up to people like you and I to talk about these types of things and let people know what's going down.
Yeah, that is such an interesting thing, particularly being in Australia. I feel that I have learned more about Indigenous people in Australia since I've been here than I mean, you kind of heard about it in pop culture in the United States, I think a little bit, but yeah, maybe a few passages. I know the phrase Trail of Tears, and it's also up to me to learn more about it. And it's been actually interesting to see how much emphasis Australia places on Indigenous communities in their country. They do something called Welcome to Country, where they acknowledge the traditional owners of the land during the beginning of every single kind of event, or a lot of events that they do. And it's just interesting because I feel like I got a little bit of probably messed up history around slavery in the United States, but there was a lot that I just. So it is so important to think about history when we talk about what's happening now. And I've been trying to read more and learn more because there's so much that you can understand better about what's happening now, I think, if you understand history. So
no. And I think that's part of, you're talking about revolution, and I almost look at revolution as change, and I think that's part of the change, being able to be in a position to let individuals that are really closer to that particular subject or topic at hand, and letting them really kind of take the forefront and leading that type of particular effort. I've been doing a lot of research recently as it relates to like trans rights and the trans community, just not in the United States, but I'm also trying to look at like Canada and other parts of the world. And it's one of those things, like it was never in my mind, right?
Yeah.
Unfortunately.
Yeah.
So now I'm trying to really educate myself on that, because trans lives matter, and as we kind of see that type of transition that's going down and further acknowledgement, listen, I got to do the work myself to figure out more about this particular thing, so that I can just move progress and move society forward in the right direction.
Yeah, they can never stop learning, and that has been one of the silver linings, I guess, is we have all had time to read, and we're less socializing and more education, and that leads me to my one of my last questions. And thank you so much for your time, Swim. I don't want to take too much of it, but
go ahead. Getting into it.
Yeah, no, that's true. I mean, we can keep going. So have you had any positive observations or silver linings or hope for New Mexico, hope for all of the United States? Yeah, just curious about your thoughts about the world moving forward. Do you think that there's going to be some positives despite a lot of really sad things happening at the moment?
Yeah, golly, and that's a tough question, because I think it's like it's one of those things where it's easy to be jaded, to be completely honest. Easy to be jaded. And when I think about my own personal experience, because I've never walked in anybody else's shoes, I've never, been a woman walking down the street at night. I've never been a trans individual participating, in the workforce, right? So I can only speak from my experience.
Sure.
But I like to say that that the ability to move society forward in the right direction of progress, it's never going to stop. It's always fluid, and it's up to individuals like yourself that are doing these types of interviews to really let people know about how it's possible to move forward in that right direction. I actually just got finished not reading, because I'm reading a bunch of books. I actually just got finished watching on that TV. Right? I was watching I just finished the Michelle Obama Becoming documentary.
Oh, I want to read that. I want to read that so much.
And I have the book, of course. COVID crazy because I haven't been reading nearly as much because my son is with me 24/7.
Yeah.
But in the book, or excuse me, in the documentary, she says so many really inspirational things, and she gets asked this type of question before of, do you think that society, and I'm paraphrasing, do you think society is going to move forward? What do you see the future is looking like? And she kind of goes back to the mantra that you saw a lot in the Obama campaign in 2008. She says that hope is really still alive. And if people like yourself have the ability to hope and move forward, then we'll see the change that we want to come. And it is easy, again, it is easy to be jaded. It's easy to say that there's going to be another Harvey Weinstein, another Bill Cosby, another George Floyd, another George Zimmerman, right?
Yeah.
In the world. And I think we'd be naive to say that these types of things are not going to happen again.
Yeah.
But you're trying to minimize it. And for me, there could be so many struggles. And I think a lot of your viewers probably have experienced this, where there's a lot of issues going on, right?
Yeah.
People are talking about global warming. Is the Earth even going to be here? You're talking about
I know.
Things like the Me Too movement, of course, oceans rising, not having enough food to eat, fracking. We're talking about like all these things, and it's like there's so many issues. People, we don't know where to turn our attention to because they're all really good initiatives. And so you really have to pick one or two, and that's what I try to do. Just pick one or two. If you pick one or two, it makes it a lot easier to focus your energy. You know what I'm saying? And one of the things I try to do is just raise my son. Out of all the things I think people can do in this world, right? You know, as much as you can recycle your glasses, you know, as much as you can sort your papers from your plastics. If you have children, just raise your children to be decent people. Because if you raise your children to be decent people, I think that alone puts you in a better position to leave the world in a better position, or leave the world in a better hands. So that's what I try to do. I just try to raise my son as to be a really good people, treat people well, recognize that there are differences that exist in this world, and make peace, not war. So that's what I'm trying to do.
Oh my gosh, that is such a beautiful answer. Oh my goodness. That's great.
He be throwing temper tantrums all the time. We want to throw him off a bridge sometimes, but I keep him around.
No. I am sure you are doing a fantastic job. That's wonderful, Swim. Is there anything else you want to add before I let you go?
Let me think. No, this has been great. You know, I know you're doing great work, and I've had a chance to listen in to some of your other interviews, Alex. So just keep up the good work. Seriously, there's a lot of moments where at least you could see, like, you know, what are the politicians doing, right? Or what are the top CEOs doing? I'm really interested in knowing, like, what is Alex Morris doing? Seriously. And I think there are many moments like that of we can feel alone. And this was a moment that was mentioned in the Michelle Obama documentary, where there are moments where you feel like you're alone. You're the only one that has these problems. No one else gets it, and you're not. There are a lot of other people that are thinking and have a lot of nervousness around what's going on in the world. And I can tell you that my mom had these same experiences. My dad had these same experiences when they were our age. And our kids are also going to have worries. We're just trying to do what we can to make sure that future generations have at least one less thing, just one less thing to worry about than when we are around. So that's what I like to say. And you're doing great work, Alex. It's been a joy.
You have really flattered me, Swim. I appreciate it. You're doing great work. Thank you so much for taking time to talk to me. I am so glad to see your face after like 10 years, I think, and we'll be in touch. Thanks.
You're lucky I don't have it. I have a photo of you somewhere in my collection of pictures, and I looked for it up and down. It's somewhere because I was gonna like surprise it and bust it out at me. But it's from back when we were in college. I'll try to find it later.
Find it for me later. All right. Okay. Thanks, Swim.